Hi, everybody. We're so glad you're here today for this presentation that asks the question, what is modern video ad serving, and how it's continued to evolve in an ever-increasing programmatic world. I'm Kevin Hunt, Senior Director of Product Management and the moderator for the presentation today. Having a publisher ad server that addresses the latest concepts in ad serving, deal terms, and has a solid programmatic foundation is fundamental to optimizing yield and serving the best impression each and every time. Today's presentation will be hosted by SpotXchange's very own Senior Director of Business Development, Mike LeBand. Mike will be speaking for about 20 minutes today, and then we'll open up the presentation for questions. So during the presentation, you'll probably think of a few questions you want to ask. So whenever you have a question, please feel free to use the chat feature located in the lower left-hand corner of the webinar. I'll flag your chat message as a question. Then at the end of Mike's presentation, I'll field the questions to Mike to be answered. To send a chat message, type your message and then select the presenters as the recipients of the message. All of the attendees for today's presentation will be muted, and your only means of communication will be through the webinar chat client. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Mike LeBand, and he's going to give you his thoughts on modern video ad serving.
Thank you, Kevin. Very excited to be on today and to talk more about this particular topic. For those of you who do not know me, a little bit of background. I've been with SpotXchange for about 5 years now. I've ran a couple of our teams internally, including more stuff with our brand safety as well as our supply operations. Now I'm fully focused on business development out here in the Northwest, based in our San Francisco office. Today we'll be talking about modern video ad serving and really how it's beginning to evolve more in a programmatic world. And we'll focus on 5 specific themes, and then look at particular components that align to each one of those themes and to see how each one of these really makes up a modern video ad server. However, first I want to talk more about the video mobile ecosystem. So this graphic here is one that's very popular at SpotXchange. I think it's a good look for how the industry is really shaping up. On the right side we see our publishers. So you can see that some publishers have O&O content, some may have an affiliate network, as well as a sales house internally. With that, they're plugging into some sort of primary ad server, or maybe they have their own proprietary technology complemented by an SSP, and then finally plug it into various different ad networks and exchanges. When we flip-flop and we look at the other side, the advertiser side, it's just as complex. You see that there's advertisers, you see that we have different brands, maybe different agencies leveraging some sort of trading desks that's utilizing a DSP plugged into all these various different supply sources. Overall, when you layer in the data and the overall metrics, you see that an ecosystem that can look like a gigantic experiment, really, for how this graphic is portrayed. As a publisher, it's easy to start leveraging and connecting into all these various different technological components. However, is it smart? And that's one thing we'll be talking about today. Here are 5 different themes. The first theme being the push for programmatic enablement, where advertisers want to start accessing your inventory through a different medium. We're going to talk over expanding inventory and the emphatic growth of mobile. Touch on transparency and how, as a publisher, you can take yourself and arm yourself with data to really learn more about how the advertiser side is viewing your inventory and their buyer behavior. We're going to focus on audience extension and talk a little bit more about how a video-hungry audience is creating a huge opportunity there for publishers. And then finally, we'll close with how advertisers' demands continue to evolve and how that's becoming more and more restrictions for publishers. So jumping in our first theme, the push for programmatic enablement. Forrester and eMarketer have said that by 2017, the market cap for programmatic is going to be roughly $33 billion worldwide, 17 billion of that being in the US. That is a tremendous amount of money flowing into that median, and it's one thing that publishers are having to address, and how they're taking their different stances and enabling the different programmatic strategies. A modern video ad server really focuses more on holistic inventory management, and one of the biggest components of it is an all-in-one solution. So a publisher can take their different traditional direct sales, their different programmatic buyers, as well as their network exchange relationships, and plug them all in and really take that information and compete all their buyers in a more of a simultaneous ad call where they're calling all their different demand sources at the same time and allowing really the highest bidder to win that particular impression opportunity. As you can see on the graphic on the right, you see that a bid comes in and the trading desk wins at $19 because they have to outbid all the other sources here. Now, generally in the past, you can see that there's been a lot more traditional ad servers out there that use more of a waterfalling technology. You see this particularly working in display. The units are much lighter. In video, it's much more complex, and it's much more difficult to use a waterfall as it's the units are much heavier. VPAID is a very sophisticated unit, and it has the ability to opt out and has the ability to break very easily. And exposing all the inventory and rather than carving it out is a much more efficient matter. The reason behind that is really if you're doing that, you're taking all your inventory and exposing it to all of your buyers at the same time. Now it's key to do that because programmatic DSPs and trading desks and the buyers behind there are leveraging tools from DSPs that are designed to churn through as many impression opportunities as possible. What they do is they evaluate all these different ad calls, they take their thousands of campaigns sitting behind them and target them appropriately. Well, this is important as it allows you to compete and to deliver as many impression opportunities to these guys to allow them to bid at high amounts on your inventory in more of a unified approach. Continuing on with their programmatic strategy, it's always important to understand the difference between the open marketplace and the private marketplace and have a strategy for how you want to leverage either or a combination of both. In the open marketplace, how do you want to expose your inventory? Is it going to be more of a blind or semi-blind or fully transparent method? And the pricing behind that, is it going to align with your rate card? Or are you going to take your rate card only for specific programmatic direct buys in more private marketplace fashions, where there's particular advertisers that are set up to bid on your inventory in a specific way? Really, when you're diving deeper into private marketplaces, we're seeing that there's really two different methods. There's a tag-based and there's also a deal ID. The differences between are really around the methodology being used. For deal ID, it's a much more efficient matter as it's not daisy-chained. It's also server-to-server, which is very important because it doesn't cause latency. With a tag, you're going to see it to be not transparent, and it's going to be much more daisy-chained. And then lastly, it's more of a client-side call where you're going to wait some time before an advertiser responds with a particular response around if they want the impression or not. Diving further into it, one key thing we focus on with publishers is to understand that programmatic does not equal problematic. And a huge piece of that is communication. So although programmatic buying and programmatic direct is designed to be more of a technological communication between the publisher and the buyer, there still needs to be discussions around the deal terms between the publisher and the buyer, but also the different vendors that are set up to be used on both the buy and the supply side, in this case a DSP and the supply side platform. So how does it look in regard to the different deal terms, the pricing, the volume, and how are those going to be set on the actual buy? One thing that we stress continually, though, with publishers as they start to dive more into programmatic direct is really focus on the different advertisers and ensure that the different campaigns you have set up are fully communicated to both sides. So in essence, you're going to operate through a more holistic approach, and your programmatic strategy is going to be much more unified. For our second theme, we're going to look at expanding inventory across all screens. So mobile is growing emphatically. We see that over the last 2 years, it's grown over 260%, and eMarketer is projecting it to be 50% of all video by 2015. And really, as a publisher, that means that you have a lot of eyeballs on the different screens out there, meaning that you may have desktop inventory as well as mobile phones and then finally connected devices. With that comes different creative types and inherent differences. There's VPAID on the desktop side, and you're going to have MRAID on the mobile side, which is becoming even more of a standard now with OpenRTB protocol. And with that also comes unique ad placements. You could see anything from a 2-inch screen all the way up to a 60-inch screen with the TV playing from some sort of connected TV. Well, the mobile ecosystem is also very fragmented. So on the display side, it's much more saturated. On the video side, it's becoming even more aligned with demand or supply. But it's a little more Wild West on the mobile side, and not only for publishers, but also buyers. and the different parameters and the different communication and transmissions that have to happen between a publisher to a buyer in the actual tech space for mobile is much more complex. So finding a partner that allows you to capitalize and efficiently monetize across all your screens is key when going out to market with your different setup. And one thing that also should be pointed out is how it's done via an SDK or some sort of tag-based integration. So our third theme is going to focus on transparency and really the battle to understand buyer behavior. Really, over the industry has seen over the last year and a half is it's easier to see what buyers are buying. However, it's much more difficult to understand why they're not buying something. So one thing I wanted to show here is really how we can start beginning to level the playing field for publishers. So as a publisher, you should know who is bidding and who is buying, at what rates are they buying at, and then finally, what can you do with that information? In the screenshot I have here, you see that there's various different advertiser domains on the left side, and then you see the actual bidding activity from the different ad partners. So you can see the amount of bids, you can see the average bid CPM, and then finally you can identify the impressions that are accruing at a per advertiser basis. Well, what can you do with this information? Well, a number of things. One, you can use it to manage any type of sales channel conflict by taking this report, giving it to your direct sales team, and ensuring that they're on the same page of who the advertisers are accessing your inventory on the programmatic side. You can obviously do things like advertiser block, category block, but also look into setting price rules to be able to set controls on which advertisers can spend across your inventory through what median and at what price. So for example, if McDonald's was accessing your inventory at $20 on the programmatic side, but you have a direct deal with them for $30, it might make sense to take that particular deal or that particular advertiser and raise it up to $30 to match whatever your rate card is. Taking a step further, though, is understanding the buyer behavior. So when working with different demand sources out there, networks, exchanges, programmatic buyers, VPAID and MRAID allow these buyers to have a lot of flexibility on how they buy your inventory and how they view your inventory. So I'm going to talk about 5 different responses that we see with some testing that we've done with some different third-party tags. So the first is there's 100 ad calls that are coming down this funnel. The first one we see is a timeout. It's pretty self-explanatory. When the inventory request comes in, the buyer sees it. However, they don't respond quickly enough. So instead of serving an impression, they're actually timed out from serving anything. This is happening roughly about 10% of the time on this particular example. The second part we see is a vast opt-out. This means that when an ad call comes in, the actual demand source decides to not participate in this particular auction, and therefore, like in this example, it looks about 13% of the time it's happening. So right there, we already have 22 of the actual responses from the buyer are not even participating or not even included in the actual auction. And really the last 2 errors you see on this is a VPAID opt-out and a tech error. Now these are very common in the industry, as mentioned, and what happens here is an actual buyer responds to the actual impression opportunity, and they load their VPAID onto the page, they take a look around, and they see that that particular page, for some reason, doesn't match with their campaigns, and therefore they're opting out. This is happening on a VPAID opt-out. On a tech error, what's occurring is that they're actually loading their VPAID onto the page, and then they're trying to load the impression they're trying to load the creative, however, some sort of error is occurring, and therefore they're abandoning the page. Lastly, and not least, the impression is served at the bottom of the funnel. So really, as a publisher, you should focus on what buyers are bringing to the table, and really do they have their own proprietary demand. Our theme 4 is around audience extension and how a video-hungry audience has really created a very large opportunity for publishers. I was sitting in a presentation last week from Comscore, and they said a stat that 82% of U.S. citizens are now watching video content on their desktop devices. So although mobile is on the rise, desktop is still very much there, and it's still a very large median that users are going to and leveraging. On this graphic on the right, I'm showing that roughly 40% of video content is being put out there by Netflix and Hulu, which is a tremendous amount. However, there's still a huge opportunity for publishers to create their own content and expose that out. And really, when you look at it, there's 2 particular ways that publishers are leveraging audience extension. The first one is retargeting their users across other third-party supply sources and hitting them that way to expand their reach. But also the second part is syndicating their video content on the third-party sites. Well, both of these are very efficient, and they're continuing to be used more and more. For syndication particularly, we're seeing that publishers are using more of this one-to-one method where they can go to their different advertisers that are buying them directly and say, you can still access my inventory on my platform, but you can also access it off my platform on third-party sites to expand your reach as well, to have a bigger buy and still remain and still get the same type of performance we moved before. So we're encouraging publishers to really go out, and we're saying, don't allow advertisers to be your only partners, but focus on taking your inventory and exposing it out, and taking your video content and exposing it out to these different third-party sites. So the last thing we'll talk about is advertiser demands and how they're continuing to evolve. Really, this is not a big shocker here, but as we all know, performance is huge for advertisers. They want to know what type of click-through rate you have, what type of view-through rate you have, and they also want to start layering on different audience demos as well as brand verification. Almost every buy is becoming to have that on the buy side. Well, as a publisher, how can you ensure that you're not missing out on these campaigns, and how can you know how your inventory aligns? So with the different vendors you're using, the different tech stacks you have involved, one thing you should be able to do is to take your inventory and start placing different types of audience on top of it, different types of brand verification on it, and to see, one, how it looks in a forecasting way, but also two, then going to these buyers and saying, I have this much inventory and I'm able to sell it to you in a more efficient way, and therefore you're more in line with the actual buyer needs to effectively sell your inventory at higher amounts. One thing that Spot Exchange is working on particularly is more of our integrated app marketplace, and we'll be continuing to evolve our extension categories to really allow for a lot of flexibility on the publisher side. So to recap what we've talked about today, I want to take a look at the industry themes versus the modern components we talked about. So the first is the push for programmatic enablement and how a holistic inventory management, more unified approach allows publishers to expose all their inventory out to all their buyers at the same time and allow the highest bidder to win. With the growth of mobile, how your tech vendor should be able to have your inventory to maximize it across all of your different devices and allow publishers to be agnostic for how they want to sell and trade. For transparency is arming yourself with data to understand who is buying, and then to go to those different buy sources to make sure that it's more of a consistent buyer behavior. Our fourth one we talked about was the audience extension opportunity and how it should be done in more of a content syndication, but as well as how you can start retargeting your users across third-party sites. And then lastly, we finished with how advertiser demands are continuing to evolve and how you should be able to take these different sources and take these different campaign requirements and allow you to look at your own inventory, see how it performs, to effectively sell it to these brands. And thank you very much. So that was all I had today for the presentation. I think right now we're going to jump into questions from Kevin.
Okay, it's time for our question and answer section. Mike, thanks so much for taking us through all of your thoughts on modern video ad serving. Make sure to use the chat feature of the webinar to ask all of your questions. It's in the lower left-hand corner there, so just remember to type in your question into the chat feature and then select the presenters as the recipients. We've already got a few questions that have been submitted, so let's go ahead and start taking those questions now. And the first one that we have, Mike, is this is a good one here. With VPaid and MRAID allowing so much flexibility to advertisers in regard to opting out, how do publishers effectively sell their inventory to these buyers?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kevin. Really, there's a number of ways you can look at that. It's pretty multifaceted. The first way is to take yourself and to ensure that you are working through some sort of way to expose as much inventory as possible to these advertisers, so that instead of rather than carving out particular pieces of inventory and selling it to them, you're able to give them as much inventory to really churn through, as I talked about before. Really taking that second step, though, is to go and identify how these different buyers are evaluating your inventory specifically with all these different transparency tools, and to then go to them and say, I can see that you're opting out on particular impression opportunities. What can we do to really align ourselves to have a more consistent buyer behavior from you? So arming yourself with that data.
Okay, thanks for that, Mike. We've had a couple more questions come in. The next one is, do you see advertisers shying away from syndicated content?
Absolutely not. I think overall there's a lot of case studies out there, and there's a lot of particular great examples of publishers who have done a great job of selling their inventory on their own platform and extending that to third-party sites in a fashion where they're taking their video content and they're syndicating it across other brands' safe sites. And advertisers are absolutely looking to fill their buys across not only their O&O content, the publisher's O&O, but also to those third-party sites. There's a lot of brand safety methods out there now that buyers are using to evaluate all these different sites, and as more and more safety protocols comes up and more quality inventory comes up, it allows for a huge opportunity for publishers.
All right, and we've got one more question that just came in, another good one here. What's the next key metric you believe advertisers are focused on with buys?
Yeah, it's another great question. In display, you've seen that viewability has really come up as of late, and as the IAB has really started to tune up its actual definition of how they're going to start evaluating the viewability metric. I think that we're going to see that coming up very quickly in the video space and the mobile space as well, for really how advertisers can now get better understanding of the IAB standards and how they want to evaluate how a campaign has performed. I think another one that's becoming even more prevalent is the brand verification, and ensuring that their campaigns have some sort of either third-party auditing or some sort of real-time method in place to ensure their campaigns are safe.
All right, great, Mike. Well, it looks like that's all the questions that we had for today, so I think we can go ahead and wrap things up. On behalf of Spot Exchange, Michael Band, the product management team, and myself, we want to thank you for attending today's presentation, and hopefully it helped answer some of the questions about our thoughts or Mike's thoughts on what is modern video ad serving. Hey, if you have any additional questions after the presentation today, another idea pops into your mind, or you just need to speak to someone over at Spot Exchange, go ahead and send an email to supply, S-U-P-P-L-Y, at spotexchange.com, and a member of our business development team will get back with you as soon as we can. Well, once again, I wanted to say thanks for taking time out of your busy day today to spend it with Spot Exchange. We really appreciate your business or your interest, and we hope to be back soon with another presentation. So have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.